guys, and welcome back to our videos about disorders. Today I want to look into borderline and I want to start with saying it's funny how we perceive disorders, right? And if you have one disorder, you have like 5 other disorders attached to it. So this thing about judging if one thing is what it is or it is something else, in my perception, it's not really steady. It's something that can change as you are chasing as a constant, more or less. I also want to say that I try to cover all the angles and perceptions as good as possible, but I only make these short videos. So if there is anything that I miss, you will like us to dive into an aspect of each disorder, you can always write it in the comments below and I will make a follow-up video on the topic. That being said, let's start. Okay, borderline disorder is looked upon as somebody who it's have similarities to bipolarity, where you change emotion really fast from happy to sad to destructive. One of the main trails is the self-destructiveness and the way that you are not able to be in the emotions of which you feel, so therefore you try to project it out. Some does that by hurting other people in maybe a verbal way or sometimes physical way, and other do is by being self-destructed or doing drugs or etc. It has a lot more aspects and perceptions for sure. If you go on Google and look it up, it will tell you all the trails, possible trails. If I look into a person with borderline, then what I see is that they are in almost a constant period of fight or flight, which means that almost all the time they are nervous, they are on a high or definitely on a low. They are constantly aware of life or death within themselves. They seek experiences that kind of keep them in this state because this is all they know somehow. The feeling of rest inside is not something that familiar to people with borderline. It's a constant fight with yourself and try to escape for the overload of feelings of which you are dealing with. If I look into, because the funny thing is now I'm looking into borderline, but there's so many of these disorders we're gonna dive into that have similarities, especially the anxiety and the fight and flight and the self-destruction behavior. What I see with a lot of people with borderline is, as I said, this constant fight and flight state is that they are in some kind of bubble they are not able to get out of. It's if you put them into a space of the hurt of which they have been through and combine it with how the brain waves functions, it kind of hold them in this what I also do see is when people are not grounded in themselves and in their heart and try to fly away from their hurt, often we have self-destruction patterns as cutting or doing drugs or etc. to try to get away from the pain. When we do that, we are open for our identities and lower vibrations to enter our system as we are no longer fully in charge. So it's like amplifying the things that we do. And as more and more we give up upon the own self and fall into destructive behavior, it's more space we give for these lower vibrations to enter our field and take more and more space within our inner world reality. And that's where things get too much and dangerous, and becomes this loop that's hard to get out of. A way to deal with people with borderline is they need a lot of space. Everything depends on where they are in the process, if they are ready to find themselves or they are still in the fight and flight. Everything is different from individual to individual, but they need a lot of space. And we need to understand that a lot of their behavior is not something, that behavior has nothing to do with you. Even that sometimes it can be cruel or brutal, it's not minded of you. It's a perfectly made mirror of what is going on within them. And the energies of which is floating through them. For a borderliner itself, you have to get to know yourself. You have to learn to understand where your hurt and pain come from and not be afraid to go through it. You have to be okay with that you function a bit differently than most people, and get to learn to know what this fight and flight state means for you and what brings you peace, which moments allows you to feel rest. How can you transform all the feelings that you have in a less hurtful way? So a way where you are conscious that you do not hurt others or hurt yourself the least possible. So borderline, it's kind of like a word for many disorders at the same time, because often, as I said before, you can have anxiety and eating disorders and everything which kind of help you to cope with your own existence. So it is with borderline as it is with every other diagnosis, that as more space you give to yourself, as more love you give to yourself, the way you are in this now, as easier it gets to deal with what is and to understand how you function. One of my own diagnoses were borderline, and they didn't know if they should give me ADHD or borderline, because I did have a self-hurting, I was harming myself, but I was not harming others. That was what made them doubt. So for me, what it did was, when they gave me all these diagnoses, I felt crazy. I felt like I had to now accept that I am that. I am borderline. I am all the 7 other diagnoses. I am that. I am a crazy person. So if we identify with the mark we get, we can't really see what is truly behind. And for me, what was truly behind is that I am highly sensitive. I've been through a lot of crazy things in my life, which meant that I was in a constant move of fight and flight. I was born dead, so I'm hyperactive from birth. So I have a high energy level. My brain runs faster than most. And somehow I had to balance all of that out with life and running away from a marriage, and everything was so chaotic at the time where I was at the mental hospital, that what they got in there was this completely lost kid who didn't know who she was, where she were, how to survive, if she even wanted to survive. And there they gave me all these marks. If we look at me today, I'm still sensitive. I'm still out of the norm. I do need to do things in a special way for me to function, but I'm most of the time happy. And I have balance and peace inside on a whole different level. I am no longer lost and have constant self-harming thoughts, patterns, and etc. because I chose to accept who I am without surrendering to being crazy, but accepting that I am different. And from there on, getting to learn to know and understand myself, how I function, why I have the behavior, I have listening to the voices when they come in the head, because this also happens for borderliners sometimes. You hear voices as well. So voices that tells me to do self-harming things to myself, all these things, is becoming conscious and aware of what patterns comes when, and learning to not let that control you, but also learning to not be afraid of it. So if we look at it from an energetic perception, as higher you raise your frequency and as more grounded you are within your own being, as less lower frequency is allowed to enter your system, and as more space you have to get to know yourself and recenter into who you're supposed to be. I don't believe that we were created wrong. I believe that we were created the way we were meant to, but we need to learn how to master who we are as an individual. So, this was the first video about borderline. I'm sure I missed a lot of aspects and angles on it. So again, like I said in the beginning, if you guys have anything you would like to add or want me to look deeper into, please write it in the comments below and we will do so. And for the rest, I'm just gonna want to say thank you so much for following and listening, and I hope that this can help you or your family to maybe loosen up the perceptions of mental disorder and have hope in that we can all exist and get something good out of it. But I believe it's time to have a different approach and to get some integrity within each individual. Yes, that word. Namaste.